out of the past a secret plan to lock up thousands of Canadians whose crime was their support for radical ideas. From the Fifth Estate and Radio-Canada, revelations about a program so draconian it even shocked a politician supposedly in charge of it.
I'm just appalled to hear that. I just can't believe that that had any government authorization behind it.
We're just after 12:30, and I'm your host today, Stefan Christoph.
A tale of paranoid security from yesterday that resonates for activists today.
CSIS, knocking on the door, pushing themselves into the apartment, insisting on speaking to my friend.
This is the public face of national security. A public show of force. The power of the state deployed to maintain public order, calculated to impress and, if necessary, frighten. But this is mostly theater. Today and throughout history, the real security is going on unseen and frequently unsupervised.
Police, open the door!
And when it goes too far, as we will see tonight, it can be exponentially more frightening than any public spectacle. Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. Our story tonight is about the work of national security you hardly ever hear of, let alone see paraded ostentatiously in the street. It's work conducted for the most part by undercover cops and spies. It's about a shocking program that we'd never heard about until recently, a secret scheme that was in place for more than 30 years. It's a story about how people in authority were prepared to use fear to justify repression in the name of public safety. It was 1950, peacetime, but war was high on the agenda of a secret gathering in Ottawa. Government officials are briefed by senior officers of the RCMP, then the leading agency of national security. They have a plan of breathtaking audacity. In the event of a crisis, a preemptive strike against people deemed to be the enemies of Canadian democracy. 5 years earlier, this man, Igor Guzenko, had fled the Soviet embassy in Ottawa with files revealing a sophisticated communist spy network throughout the United States and Canada.
You are Mr. Igor Guzenko?
That's right.
And you are the man who exposed part of the Canadian-Soviet espionage system in 1945.
That's correct.
Guzenko and the hood he wore in public seemed to offer confirmation that the world was full of sinister conspiracies, that the communists had fanatically faithful friends in Canada, and that the world was but a blink away from another global war. By the early 50s, the doomsday scenario was easy to believe. The outbreak of war in Korea looked like a rehearsal for World War III, which would be a war between democracy and Soviet dictatorship, a war with the potential to annihilate the human race.
The communists were elusive and hard to find, and the Canadians were given the task of chasing after them.
The prospect of a war that could be fought with nuclear weapons gave renewed legitimacy to espionage.
Well, there was a very great fear of the war between the Cold War becoming a hot war again. You know, it was very intense.
Robert Kaplan, who would one day become Canada's Solicitor General, officially the Minister of Spies, came of age in the Cold War era.
The atmosphere was so different in those days. You know, people really, the public was scared of a communist threat.
Fear can generate extreme reactions. An American politician named Joseph McCarthy shrewdly demonstrated in the early 50s that the fear of communists had huge political potential.
Another general who protects communists is not fit to wear that uniform, General.
Question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
The American public for years would tolerate the public persecution of people tainted with the accusation that they were communists or soft on communism.
I remember in my high school back in the early 50s, we'd come to school and we'd sit in our classroom and listen to the McCarthy hearings on the radio.
Whether you are or have ever been a member of the Communist Party.
Horror with a very strong disapproval. We just thought it was wrong.
If Kaplan was alarmed by what was happening in Washington, he'd have been appalled by what was going on at home. In August 1950, it would turn out that Canadians were no less vulnerable to fear. As Canadians nervously observed the unfolding public witch hunt in the U.S., the government of Canada approved a secret and potentially more menacing assault on civil liberties. The plan was called PROFUNC, targeting prominent functionaries in groups believed to be pro-Soviet. It was a strategy of breathtaking ambition, the targeting across the land of people with communist affiliations, sympathies, even family connections. And it was approved in its broadest outlines by the Government of Canada. It was the brainchild of the RCMP Commissioner, Stuart Taylor Wood. He'd led the National Police Force for 13 tough years, from 1938 through World War II till the spring of 1951. He had a not surprising interest in national security and a preoccupation with identifying and, if necessary, neutralizing spies. This is a letter to the Minister of Justice in February 1950. The Commissioner sets out his master plan: to spy on and, when necessary, to intern 16,000 suspected communists and maybe even 50,000 of their sympathizers. Internment. It's a word with a lot of nasty baggage, most of it derived from excesses in distant places: South Africa, Siberia, the ghettos of Eastern Europe. Canada has its own dark history of internments: Ukrainians, Italians, Japanese, Canadians, in the early 40s, communists. But PROFUNC was unique in Canada, not just for its scale, but for targeting Canadians for political beliefs that were legal. To this day, the lists of potential internees compiled by the RCMP remain a secret. But we now know that it didn't take much to get on the list of targets: party membership, family connections, associations that suggested sympathy for Marxist doctrine qualified thousands of Canadians for indefinite incarceration. And from documents we've seen, we can for the first time identify the types of people that the Mounties had in mind. Robert Mendel Laxer made no secret of his politics. He was a communist, a full-time organizer for the Labour Progressive Political Party, a legal entity in Canada. He lived with his wife and 3 young children on a quiet, dead-end street in a working-class Toronto neighborhood. Growing up, the son of a committed communist wasn't always easy. James Laxer, Robert Laxer's son.
I'm about 10, 11. And the teacher, she says, today we're going to do a very exciting thing. We're going to all learn what each other's fathers do for a living. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Maybe recess will come along. She'll never get to me. She finally gets to me, and I stand up, and, Jimmy, what does your father do for a living? And I say, I don't know.
He might have said his dad had been a soldier, served overseas in World War II. But above all else, Dad was a Red, and it bothered him.
It felt awful. First of all, I was very adept at figuring out, even as a child, that while there was clearly support for the Communist Party in downtown Toronto in this period, that most people hated the Communist Party. I knew that. That Canadian politics at the federal level, in my opinion, is dysfunctional.
Jimmy Laxer grew up to become a prominent academic and author and a committed social democrat. He has no time for communist ideology or rhetoric, but he still has traumatic memories of childhood among communists in a time of strident anti-communism.
I felt deeply threatened. I felt that the world I lived in was a very insecure world. The message was, and I got this from by the time I was 3 or 4, was that the police were bad. The police were our enemy. The police were out there to do us harm.
In fact, the police were never far away, something that his parents would have realized intuitively. Did they ever overtly suggest to you that you got to be careful out there, that we are in a very precarious position, we are probably being watched, we are being listened to, we are being monitored, and we could be snatched at any time? Did they ever give you that?
They didn't. They gave me the feeling that all those things were true without saying you have to worry about that or you have to watch. They didn't specifically say that. But the message was very powerful.
When we come back, a message more sinister than his parents realized.
This shocks the hell out of me, to hear that this was actually in place. I didn't know that.
It was called PROFUNC. The targets prominent functionaries of groups with communist affiliations. This is what would happen all across the country in the event of international hostilities. Special teams in uniforms would show up in residential neighborhoods, take up tactical positions, await a signal from a designated control center. When that signal came, they'd move toward the target houses and their unsuspecting occupants. This is a story about national security. It's about a time when Canada was willing to strip thousands of unsuspecting Canadians of basic rights in the name of public order. It was a plan for mass internments, and it was kept alive for more than 30 years. Casa Loma in Toronto, a tourist landmark symbolic of an era of optimism and extravagance. What is less well known, it was once a designated prison for people deemed to be disloyal. Robert Laxer and his family lived just a few blocks from Casa Loma in the 50s. By all appearances, a typical Toronto family. The Laxers always knew that as communists they were being watched, but they couldn't have imagined that there was also a plan in place to lock them up. Communists and sympathizers in Toronto would be herded onto buses and confined at Casa Loma. They'd later be dispersed to more conventional detention in penitentiaries. After more than 50 years, we were able to provide Jim Laxer with details of that extraordinary national security initiative called PROFUNC. And there was a plan in place to round up active communists, people in organizations.
You are, to some extent, scaring the hell out of me, but I'm not that surprised.
Well, let me tell you how specific it is, Jim.
Okay, okay.
You know where you guys, where your dad and mother, who was just as red as your dad.
Absolutely.
You know,
very proud of
you
it.
know where they were going to be put?
No.
Casa Loma. A couple of blocks away from home.
Yeah. They were going to be put in Casa Loma.
Yeah, and so were you.
You mean as a kid?
As a kid, and
As a
your
kid.
brother and sister.
This shocks the hell out of me, to hear that this was actually in place. I didn't know that. It shocks the hell out of me because when you say it to me, I feel a kind of anxiety that brings back the anxiety that I felt as a kid.
That the plan